Imagine one day waking up to learn that the majority of those around you no longer doubt anything, that everything has gotten so noisy so quickly and so overflowing with data that the human brain, formerly a potent instrument for research, discernment, and development, has become apathetic and passive. Consider that thought. The fate of a society, the place where critical thinking disappears, where the capacity for reasoning, challenge, and reflection are swapped out for quick responses, superficial viewpoints, and group echo chambers. In this video, we will reveal the unsettling, the real reason for the disappearance of critical analysis and the perilous emergence of what some philosophers today refer to as collective ignorance, a situation where large numbers of people embrace superficial thinking that accepts stories without question and give up their independence of thought without even being aware of it. And when this trip comes to a conclusion, we'll find the strongest and depressing reality of everything, one that might decide whether we get our minds back or completely lose them to a mechanism intended to maintain our comfortable numbness. But before we go too far, take a moment to click the subscribe button, give it a like, and leave a comment with your opinions. The material you are about to encounter might contradict your beliefs, can perhaps tremble the foundations themselves of your worldview. Tell anybody who dared to think about this, as well as those who continue to believe that it is worthwhile to pursue the truth. Let's start with an unsettling reality. It's difficult to think in the modern world. It is frequently discouraged. The contemporary world does not encourage reflection. It incentivizes uniformity and quick emotional responses. And this is not a coincidence. From algorithms that only give you the information you want to hear, to systems of education that put memorizing ahead of investigation, the public is actively preventing us from exercising critical thought. The thinker, decades ago, Noam Chomsky, forewarned us of this. In his examination of propaganda and the media, he clarified how hierarchies of power depend on what he referred to as consent manufacturing. Stated differently, when individuals are conditioned to consume without inquiry, to concur without comprehending, they become simple to control and even simpler to trick. Thinking critically, formerly regarded as a basic human ability, is currently regarded as inconvenient. It impedes the culture of anger. It slows down debates on the internet. It questions and challenges ideologies. However, is this actually the case? Because in a society that is fixated on being correct, just posing such query is regarded as risky. However, how did we arrive here? The issue is profound. Information overload is one of the main causes. Every day, we all encounter. Neuroscientist Daniel Levitin claims the typical individual nowadays handles 5 times as much data per day compared to a few decades earlier. We are inundated with notifications, opinions on breaking news updates, and advertisements all day long. This type of input was not intended for human thinking. When the mind is overloaded, it begins to rely on mental habits and takes shortcuts, group thinking, and cognitive biases to deal with complexity instead of objectively assessing concepts. It looks to other people for clues, particularly from peers, influences, or authorities that are seen. We refer to this as social proof, and even though it's a natural survival strategy, it is easily manipulable. Consider how frequently you've come across an online post, thousands of comments and likes, and believed it to be significant or true. That isn't rational speech. That's a shortcut in psychology, and it's among the causes. It is quite easy for collective stupidity to spread, not due to a lack of intelligence, but because they are being trained to obey commands rather than logic. The decrease in reading is another unsettling trend, particularly the neurologist who reads deeply. Marianne Wolf explains how digital media is rewiring our minds. We now bounce between tabs and skim more. I find it difficult to focus on longer texts. Here's the catch though. It takes constant focus to engage in critical thinking. You are unable to evaluate and reflect or actually comprehend if you have a persistently short attention span. Consider this. How recently have you read a complete article without looking at your phone? How recently did you take a moment to yourself after listening to something thought-provoking to consider instead of respond? These minor customs were formerly widespread. or disappearing. The deceased Carl Sagan, one of the 20th century's greatest thinkers, once cautioned that our civilization is incredibly reliant on technology. In science, where almost no one is knowledgeable regarding technology and science, he was worried about more than simply stupidity. However, the decline in critical thinking skills regarding the systems on which we rely in an opinion-filled world, ideological conflict, and hot takes, thinking quietly is the ultimate act of defiance. Obviously, however, the issue isn't limited to technology or schooling. Additionally, emotional critical thinking is unsettling. It compels us to acknowledge our ignorance. It tests our egos. We may experience cognitive dissonance as a result, where new knowledge conflicts with our deeply held beliefs. Because in a society where certainty is valued above all, self-assurance and individuality, this poses a serious threat. Therefore, rather than believing that we defend, we withdraw into our tribes. We cancel and repeat slogans. We stay away from, we commit slogans to memory rather than using dialectic. The type of open-minded Socratic discussion, it has fueled the development of philosophy for thousands of years. What we are now seeing is more than just a reduction in thought. There is a widespread trend toward mental indolence, and yet the results are disastrous. Due to the fact that when individuals stop thinking, they cease asking questions, and when others do the same, they become susceptible to manipulation. To instill terror through propaganda, and this is the query that we all need to ask. Who gains when a population loses its ability to think independently? Stay with me, because of what's going to happen next. We'll reveal how profoundly these factors permeate every aspect of our life. And the reasons behind recovering our ability to think is more than a personal assignment, but a duty of conscience to comprehend the causes of this widespread deterioration. We need to see past appearances and document the evolution of certain systems, not to foster critical thinking, but to repress it first. Let's discuss the educational system. John Taylor Gatto, a teacher who has won awards and vocal opponent of conventional education, claimed that there is no such thing as modern schooling. To develop self-sufficient thinkers, in his own words, in actuality, schools don't actually teach anything. Aside from how to follow directions, according to Gatto, mandatory education was created in the era of industry, not to educate pupils, but to get them ready for predictable factory life, compliance, and non-disruptiveness. Instead of teaching students how to think, consider that we learn how to think. Children are assessed starting at a young age, not on the depth or uniqueness of their ideas, but on their recall and memorization skills. Conformity is rewarded. Curiosity is frequently viewed as a diversion. As the message becomes evident over time, observe the guidelines by coloring inside the lines, and refrain from posing too many queries. This trend continues outside of the classroom. It only gets worse as you get older. In the media, at work, we discover, even in our friendships, that speaking up, challenging the consensus, sometimes having controversial opinions, can cost us. Fear of social rejection, of being classified as challenging or contentious, is frequently sufficient to mute even our most urgent uncertainties, so we remain silent. However, quiet eventually turns into complicity. This was noted by psychologist Erich Fromm in his book, Flee from Liberty, where he clarified how many people do this in secret, wish to give up their intellectual freedom, because responsibility is a prerequisite for full freedom. And accountability can be horrifying. Thinking independently entails you can't hold other people responsible for your ignorance anymore. You can't find solace in the crowd anymore. You have to confront the unpredictability of reality. And that is too much of a burden for many. Thus, we opt for comfort instead. We decide to divert. We prefer simplicity to intricacy, and doing so makes us easier to manage. Social media has made this issue worse. Two levels that are unthinkable. What used to be a place for international connections has turned into a battleground for ideological conflicts, outrage cycles, and manipulation by algorithms. All of the platforms are made to keep you scrolling, reacting, and eating, not believing that you've been nudged continuously in the direction of information that supports your views. You are urged to reply right away. emotionally, and frequently in a furious engagement is rewarded on the platforms. They thrive on divisiveness, not truth. In the midst of all this commotion, not comprehending the rational voice is muffled. Being thoughtful seems to be sluggish, feeble, even unimportant. Why think? By responding more quickly and receiving more likes. This was anticipated by philosopher Marshall McLuhan in the 1960s. The message is the medium, he said, indicating that our thoughts are influenced by the information we are given. The media of today prioritize speed over depth, fury over subtlety, and assurance over modesty. Even the truth itself has been warped. In the era of false information, what's real frequently loses significance in favor of viral content. People no longer assess ideas' merits, founded on logic or proof. They evaluate them according to the number of persons who concur. The tyranny of the majority is this, in its most hazardous form, not political, but intellectual. So, what are our next steps? We start by posing more insightful queries. Inquiries that cast doubt on the status quo. Questions that require genuine responses, not statistics or catchphrases. Without context, what do you think you should believe? Who gains from that conviction? What presumptions underlie your certainty? How frequently do you look for contrasting viewpoints, to comprehend them rather than to criticize them? These are difficult questions. However, they are essential. Since the remedy for the general lack of intelligence is bravery, not simply intelligence. The bravery to make mistakes and to grow. Having the guts to acknowledge your ignorance, and to begin the process of learning anyhow. Socrates, among the first to advocate for critical thinking, famously asserted, "Knowing that you know nothing is the only way to truly be wise." This was not a self-deprecating statement. It was an invitation to continue being inquisitive, to maintain intellectual humility, and to never stop inquiring among a vast and enigmatic world. However, humility is uncommon today. People worship certainty. People confuse arrogance for knowledge. Although everyone has an opinion, not everyone understands it. Few people want to listen, but everyone wants to talk. Ironically, silent people tend to be true thinkers. Perceptive, but reserved, they are aware that noise does not breed wisdom, but from contemplative quiet, from a thorough understanding of complexity, and for that reason, critical thinkers are frequently neglected and outnumbered. In a society that values quickness and display thinking slowly has little possibility of success. However, it must not be abandoned, because when you relinquish your capacity for independent thought, you are now a puppet and no longer free. Your strings are being pulled by invisible forces. Furthermore, those forces are not abstract. They are cultural, political, and economic. They are the businesses that make money off of your devotion to pointless material, the politicians who depend on your feelings, the establishments that rely on your uncritical compliance. But after you get your thoughts back, everything changes, and you become more difficult to control. You start to recognize the illusion. You quit consuming ideas passively, and turn into a proactive truth seeker, and in that action, no matter how minor, you start a fire. A philosophical fire that has raged throughout history. Revolutionary scientists, as well as truth-tellers who never stopped thinking thus. The current query is this: will you stay with me and do the same? Because the following section will delve further into the psychology of collaborative reasoning. You'll learn why these traps can catch even the smartest individuals, and how to deceive the brain into thinking rather than what is genuine, what it wishes to be. Actually, we're not done. The most significant discovery is still to come. To really comprehend how collective stupidity has increased, we must investigate the battleground. Notwithstanding our belief in rationality, inside the mind itself, the reality is that there is much more emotion in the human brain than it makes sense. We like to think that facts are the basis for our decisions. However, the truth is much more nuanced. In his groundbreaking The Psychologist Who Won the Nobel Prize for Thinking Fast and Slow, Kahneman, Daniel demonstrated that our brains use two systems to function. One is quick and instinctual, while the other is methodical and slow. The rapid system is emotive and automatic. It makes snap judgments, makes quick decisions, and uses less energy. The slow system is considerate, analytically cautious, however. It takes work, and here is where the problem lies. In our fast-paced, constantly changing world, the majority of folks are in fast mode. There just isn't any time or the ability to pause and reflect. Thus, we use heuristics and prejudices and instinctive mental shortcuts, but are frequently incorrect. This is a great place to manipulate large numbers of people. Politicians and marketers, media sources, they are all aware of how to take advantage of our mental shortcuts. They reduce complicated problems to straightforward dichotomies. They circumvent reason by using emotionally laden words. They acquaint us with recurring stories until we acknowledge them as fact, not because we confirmed them, but because they seem familiar. And the risk arises when we believe something to be true. Our brains start to support that notion, irrespective of the evidence. Confirmation bias is the term for this, and it's among the strongest. The occurrence of cognitive traps. Think for a moment about your personal beliefs. How frequently do you look for proof that opposes them? How frequently do you actually hear alternative viewpoints? Instead of getting your counter-argument ready, probably not as frequently as you believe, if you're being honest. And that's human nature, not a fault. But when we're not conscious of it, it becomes an issue. Group thought is another important idea, a phenomena in psychology where the aspiration for harmony or group conformance results in decisions that are dysfunctional or illogical. It has been recorded in from historical horrors to corporate catastrophes for the sake of togetherness. People keep their doubts to themselves. They prioritize consensus over the truth. Irving Janis is a social psychologist who came up with the phrase, discovered that even extremely smart, well-meaning individuals is capable of making disastrous choices when they quash criticism and steer clear of critical analysis. Why it feels uncomfortable to challenge the group. Because defying expectations demands more than just intelligence. It calls for bravery and ethics. However, history demonstrates that advancements have always been made by those who had the courage to think differently. Nietzsche, Darwin, and Galileo.